Amazing twist, single dad janitor discovers his CEO in tears. What she revealed changed everything. Mike tightened his grip on the mop as he glanced at the clock. The hum of fluorescent lights and the faint whir of the air conditioning manufactured the familiar loneliness that settled in after hours. Every evening, down these polished hallways of Gleason Industries, he reflected on his son Sam, who was likely lost in a world of his own or flicking through his favorite cartoons. The thought pulled at him, a reminder of the weighted responsibility he carried. A janitor by trade, he existed in the margins of corporate life, overlooked, hardly acknowledged. Tonight, burdens heavy on his heart, he worried about the potential layoff looming over him. If the merger went through, if the whispers in the break room were true, it could mean the end of everything he worked tirelessly for. The faint sound of muffled sobs stopped him mid-mop. Hesitation flickered across his face as he approached the corner office, the door slightly ajar. Curiosity piqued, he peered inside. There was Sarah, Gleason Industries CEO, a woman often seen commanding the room with confidence, now reduced to tears, her face buried deep in her hands. The sight was disarming. Cautiously, he nudged the door open wider, the creaking hinge betraying his presence. Her hands fell away, revealing red-rimmed eyes filled with frustration and sorrow. A powerful allure drew him forward, an instinct branching from shared burdens. "Is everything okay?" he asked softly, feeling foolish for intruding, yet unable to turn away. To his surprise, she locked eyes with him, her vulnerability mirroring his own worries. Slowly, she unfolded the complexities weighing on her, an impending merger that could obliterate jobs, including his. It was a cruel irony. She revealed that her father had been a janitor too, instilling the same work ethic that pushed her to rise despite the odds. The legacy of their fathers connected them in this fragile moment, but the looming threat of corporate greed hovered ominously, trapping them in shared anxiety. The weight of responsibility swelled in Mike's chest. Should he protect his job? The very job that kept Sam safe? But what about the legacy Sarah sought to uphold? Every discussion spun a thread tighter around him, constricting his mind with questions that had no easy answers. As he stood in that office, ridiculed by the delicate tension of their respective fates, his thoughts raced. Could he really align with her newfound vision? He could feel something inside him ignite. He could help her shape an ethical framework, defy the shark seeking to devour the company they both depended on. But retribution loomed near. Risking everything could shatter his fragile world. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. He sensed Sarah's determination mirrored his fears. The stakes were insurmountable. With each passing day, the walls closing in on both of them grew thicker, an invisible barrier marked by ambition and desperation. Mike's growing understanding of corporate dynamics was a spark in this darkness, one he had never recognized in himself. But what if the alliance they formed wasn't impenetrable? As they tossed ideas back and forth, Mike felt the pressure rising. Betrayal could lurk in the shadows, waiting to sever his path. He clenched his fists, a whirlwind of dread and purpose conflicting within him. They were tightly woven together in a precarious web of aspirations, but the threat of loss loomed overhead. Would Mike's newly found role become a lifeline or break apart under the scrutability of corporate agendas? The questions gnawed at him. As night deepened, his heart raced, and he realized that this was only the beginning. Struggling with his choices, he understood there were no easy answers, just the harsh reality of survival and the yearning to rewrite the narrative of their lives. The stakes had transformed, his family's future teetered at the brink, waiting for the final, decisive blow. As the clock struck 10, the silence of the office enveloped Mike and Sarah, wrapping them in the complexities of their uncertain futures. The weight of the previous conversation lingered, changing the air around them. Mike shifted his gaze, contemplating not just the world he inhabited as a janitor, but the broader landscape of corporate hierarchies that excluded him. In that moment, he saw a flicker of his own potential rise to the surface. "You know, I've always admired what you've built here," he said, surprising himself as the words escaped. "Your father would be proud." A small, bittersweet smile played at the corners of Sarah's mouth. "He taught me resilience, but he often worried I'd forget my roots. I'm trying not to lose sight of what matters." Those words shaped a resolve in Mike. His identity as a janitor, often perceived as a badge of insignificance, began to feel more like a wellspring of insights. What if instead of hiding behind the looming merger, we showcased our commitment to the team here? He suggested, his pulse quickening with the idea. What if we could demonstrate that employee welfare should be a priority? Sarah's eyes sparkled for a moment, considering the ramifications of his proposal. "That's a bold idea, Mike. We could bring the employees together, share our vision and reassure them. But the board. They won't like it if we stray from the bottom line." Facing the confrontation head-on ignited a fire deep within Mike. Doubt had often kept him sidelined, yet here he was, ready to confront the threats to his survival. Maybe the bottom line shouldn't just be money. What if we risk being seen as human instead of just a number? Both were staring at the precipice of a decision. Her privilege against his fight for survival. The conversation wasn't merely transactional, it was transformational. Both saw the shadows of their fears reflected in each other's eyes, the danger of jeopardizing their respective positions, and more importantly, their values. Mike felt a swell of emotion, the realization that he was not just a janitor in this vast corporate puzzle, but a pivotal piece to potentially reshape the narrative. For once, a plan unfolded that didn't feel like wishful thinking. He eagerly painted a picture of gatherings, discussions around corporate ethics, and employee engagement initiatives, each aspiration revealing more of himself. He was tapping into a reservoir of leadership he had never acknowledged. As they brainstormed ways to pivot the company's PR strategies, a newfound camaraderie forged between them. Each strategy they outlined became a testament to their shared resolve. The outside pressures began to dissolve under their strategic flames, a spark of corporate rebellion igniting just below the surface. However, as ideas took shape, lurking worries gnawed at Mike's mind, the board's potential backlash. Would they let Sarah enact these plans, or would they view them as a threat? The implications of failure were too significant. Time ticked on, and with each glance at the clock, Mike felt the inevitable approach of dawn, bringing with it urgent decisions that could make or break everything he held dear. "Let us meet again tomorrow," Sarah said, breaking the spell of uncertainty. "This could be our chance." Mike nodded but felt his heart race at the weight of her words. Tomorrow could mean everything, or it could mark the point of no return. With the office surrounding them now strangely charged with possibilities, Mike stepped out of the corner office, ready to step into a new role he'd never envisioned for himself. Yet, as he walked into the proximity of his cleaning cart, doubt followed as closely as ambition. How much was he willing to sacrifice for this budding alliance? And if it imploded, how would he protect Sam's future? The soft click of the office door closing left him with a lingering thought. The struggle ahead was only beginning. Would he rise to meet it or allow fear to obscure the path he had just begun to carve? The stakes had never been higher. The dawn of a new day brought with it both hope and dread. As he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that threats were now coming from all sides. Was he ready to face them head-on? Tomorrow would demand answers, and for the first time, he was prepared to confront the challenges that lay ahead, but would they work for him or against him? As the sun's first rays seeped through the office windows, Mike's heart raced with anticipation and trepidation. He arrived early, the faint scent of polished floors mingling with his determined resolve. Every step he took toward that corner office felt like he was walking into the unknown. Today was critical. He could transform the narrative or watch it fragment. He spent the morning meticulously cleaning, his mind churning with strategies. The weight of his concealed ambitions pressed heavily against the mundane task of pushing the mop. This routine, once comforting, felt like a shackle, an impediment to his burgeoning aspirations. Was the man who cleaned the floors ready to speak on behalf of the employees? Could he really fight for them, or would his own fears dictate his limitations? The clock ticked louder than his thoughts. Would Sarah confront the board for him? Or someday, would he find himself standing at the conference table, advocating for those whose voices had long been ignored, bridging the gap between the executive suite and the cleaning closet? Each scenario spun in his mind with dizzying intensity. Just before 10, Sarah entered the office, her expression clouded with worry. He could see dark circles beneath her eyes, evidence of her own battles. "I'm so glad you're here," she began, her tone low. "I talked to the board this morning, and they weren't receptive to our ideas. They don't want to spend money on employee initiatives when they're focused on the merger." As she spoke, Mike felt a fist of anxiety tighten around his chest. It seemed the corporate walls were closing in, and every ounce of hope he had carefully constructed that night was at risk of collapsing. "But we can change their minds. We have to show them that a focus on the staff enhances productivity. If we can highlight the human aspect of the business, we could." Mike. She interrupted, her voice sharp yet desperate. "You don't understand, they see that as weakness. They want to chase profits, not ideals." In that moment, a searing indignation rose within him. Why should they ignore what truly matters? He clenched his fists, grounding himself in the reality that something greater was at stake than money. It was dignity, respect, and the future of everyone who worked within those walls. "If they don't see it, if they don't want to see it, then we must take that chance on our own," he said, the conviction in his voice surprising even him. "What do you mean?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, curiosity piqued. Mike leaned closer, fueled by the slightest spark of courage. "We could gather everyone. Hold an informal meeting. Share stories what this company means to them. If we can show the board a united front, maybe they'll be forced to listen." Her eyes widened, doubt reflected in their depths. "You're suggesting a revolt? I can't jeopardize my career like that. And I can't watch the people I care about risk theirs because of fear." The words resonated between them, a profound declaration of intent. It was risky, and both knew it. With bated breath, he waited for her response, the tension weaving through the air like a tangible force. After a pause, she exhaled a reluctant sigh, a mixture of frustration and admiration. "All right. Let us do it. But we have to proceed carefully. We risk everything." With a tentative agreement, shadows of doubt lingered over both their faces, but fresh determination ignited within Mike. The plan, however half-formed, was a party that would rally employees behind a shared vision. Finally, he felt linked to something larger than himself. As they began outlining details, the first whispers of a shared purpose began to unfurl, urging Mike toward an extraordinary transformation. The feeling of purpose was addictive, spilling over each calculated plan they crafted. Yet, amid their rising enthusiasm, a gnawing anxious thought pierced his mind. What if the board retaliated harder than they anticipated? With every passing moment, the stakes increased, intertwining his resolve with the potential for deep personal fallout. As the office door closed behind Sarah moments later, leaving him in the silence of an office buzzing with possibilities, Mike realized the truth: he was on the brink of an entirely new existence. At that instant, he didn't just see his role as a janitor, he understood his intrinsic value, the silent power of his position. He felt poised on the edge of destiny. What lay ahead was treacherous, yet the thrill of it rushed through him like adrenaline. He had made a choice to climb beyond his janitorial past, to reshape narratives, risk by risk, establishing a new legacy for himself and those who surrounded him. The fear was tangible, but so was the promise of the day ahead. With determination coursing through him, Mike whispered to himself, "It's time to stand tall." The boldness of his commitment sparked a fire within, though little did he know, hidden challenges awaited those who would stop at nothing to maintain the status quo. Tomorrow, as the board convened, would their voices speak louder than fears, or would they continue to dwell in the shadow? Would he be ready to face the ramifications, or would he falter when the decisive moment arrived? The next day dawned with a heavy expectation draping over Mike. The air felt electric as he entered the office, the typical sounds of bustling employees slightly dulled by the weight of his thoughts. He searched for a hint of resolve in his own reflection in the polished windows, yet uncertainty clung to him like static, an itch he couldn't scratch. Sarah had provided him with a semblance of determination, yet self-doubt threatened to cloud that resolve. As he pushed the mop across the gleaming floor, his mind drifted between the imagined triumph of presenting their case to the board and the crushing weight of potential failure. He had never stood up for himself before, let alone for others. Each stroke of the mop felt like an ironic prelude, the drudgery starkly contrasting the momentous discussions he envisioned occurring only a few feet away at the glass-topped conference table. Would he really gather the courage to stand before the board and those who had once looked down upon him? As he wrung out the mop, resolve coursed through him. He had to prove that workers deserved to be heard not just as numbers on a ledger but as human beings with dreams and contributions worthy of recognition. The day ambled forward, marked by an awareness that the meeting was approaching. Mike glanced at the clock, each tick igniting new anxieties. He decided to take a break and grabbed a coffee, its aroma a fleeting comfort against the storm in his mind. The break room was crowded with murmured conversations, but Mike felt disconnected, anchored by the weight of his commitment and the fear of what lay ahead. As if sensing his turmoil, Sarah approached him. "Have you thought any more about what we discussed?" she asked, her voice a mixture of support and concern. "I have," he began, anguish threading through his tone. "But every time I think about speaking up, I freeze. How can someone like me, just a janitor, possibly make an impact?" "Mike, you are so much more than that," she replied, her conviction stimulating a flicker of belief inside him. "You see what others overlook, what really matters. That's your strength." She continued, "Just remember why we're doing this. It's not about you or me, but about everyone who feels trapped in silence. That's what we need to show them the power of real voices." The clarity of her words struck a chord, pushing him to push through the wall of self-doubt. He recognized that his fears were not unique. If he faltered, it would resonate with all those who had long surrendered to complacency. Mike straightened, channeling every ounce of defiance he could muster. Time crawled as the moment of truth loomed. The conference room felt like a battleground, each board member a formidable opponent guarding their territory. As he and Sarah entered, the air thickened with tension. A deliberate glance at the executive faces signaled the urgency of what was to come. Just as the meeting commenced, something unexpected occurred. The CEO, known for her steely demeanor, appeared to be more fragile than he had ever witnessed. The moments passed slowly, with conversations ricocheting around him, yet her absent expression captured his attention. Then, it happened. A tear traced down her cheek, mimicking his internal turmoil. Mike's heart raced, caught between the initial shock and a burgeoning realization. Perhaps their struggles weren't so distant from management's invisible battles, grappling with responsibilities that felt insurmountable. "Are you okay?" he instinctively asked, stepping away from the shadows where he felt accustomed to dwelling. His voice cut through the corporate chatter, breaking a spell that had bound the room. She met his gaze, surprised yet somehow grateful. "No one ever asks that," she replied softly, her smile tinged with sadness. "Today's been overwhelming." In that moment, Mike understood something profound. This was not just about advocating for employees, it was about reaching out across the void that separated them, rekindling a shared humanity. He took a step forward, feeling emboldened. With burgeoning confidence, he gathered the voices he had so desperately hoped to amplify. "Maybe we should start sharing those stories, not just as an initiative but as a step toward understanding each other." The tension shifted, the decoration of the room felt less imposing. As the board members shifted their attention toward him, curiosity began to replace skepticism. The true question lingered in his mind: was this the moment he would finally confront the unspoken barriers? Or was he preparing himself for a battle that could unravel his life as he knew it? As all eyes turned to face him, Mike steeled himself, ready to transcend the narrative that had constrained him for so long. The time had come to face not only the board but the truth about himself. Would this revelation lead to a newfound alliance, or would it expose him to the fierce consequences he feared? Only time would reveal the ultimate truth. Mike felt the collective gaze of the board members weighing heavily on him, an intoxicating mix of fear and exhilaration igniting within his chest. "Understanding each other," he repeated, his voice stronger now, echoing with a sudden clarity that seemed to bounce off the walls of the conference room. The moment felt monumental, yet every fiber of his being was attuned to the precariousness of his position. As Mike spoke, the fragmented pieces of his life began to come together, weaving a narrative he had never dared to craft. He realized that he had spent much of his life anticipating validation from others, neglecting to recognize his own value. The empathy he felt on behalf of his colleagues was a reservoir of strength he hadn't acknowledged until this very moment. Perhaps we can recreate a space where voices are heard, he continued, drawing courage from an unscripted pool of sincerity. Where each person in this company, no matter their title, has the opportunity to share their story. It is those stories that enlighten us all and ultimately fuel our growth. He could see the board's incredulous expressions begin to shift. The CEO's tear-streaked face ignited a flicker of vulnerability among her peers. Curious, probing questions passed through their eyes. The energy in the room morphed. Walls he'd always imagined impenetrable began to crack. "Mike, that's a bold statement," one of the board members finally ventured, skepticism still evident but laced with curiosity. "How do we transition from corporate strategies to personal narratives?" It was a challenge, but Mike felt the urge to rise to it. "Each of us navigates challenges every day," he responded, his tone unwavering. "The pressures of performance, expectations, those aren't confined to positions or titles. If we share our struggles, we might discover solutions that are more than just numbers on a report." The floodgates opened. The CEO's theretofore stoic expression softened further, inviting discourse. The others hesitated as if on the precipice of both understanding and revelation. Mike felt their collective breath suspended between the familiar and the unknown. Caught up in the moment, Mike glanced over at Sarah, who offered him a supportive nod. The presence of her belief ignited something deep within him, a burgeoning sense of responsibility not just to represent himself, but to shepherd the collective voice of those around him. He began articulating a vision that was bigger than himself, painting it with vivid strokes of empathy and collaboration. With each word, his doubts began to dissipate. Sharing stories could indeed transform the very fabric of their work culture. He envisioned workshops where employees could voice dreams deferred, friends lost, and aspirations crushed under the weight of corporate expectation. Yes, there would be risks, but there was also potential for something magnificent to unfold. "Imagine what we could accomplish if each of our employees felt valued," Mike pressed, the tempo of his conviction building. "They would not only work for us but work with purpose, fostering innovation driven by genuine connection rather than obligation." His heart raced as he finished, the room reverberating with the echo of his words. Silence hung palpably, a hush laden with the weight of contemplation. The once omnipresent walls of indifference seemed to fade, revealing the human fabric behind the corporate machine. But just as anticipation began to ripple through him, he sensed the tides shifting again. A furrowed brow appeared on the CEO's forehead, a conflicted storm brewing behind her empathetic demeanor. "Mike," she began, her voice steady but layered with an impending weight that could shatter the moment. "I appreciate your perspective more than you know. But you must understand, changing the culture here is not just about sharing stories. There are stakes involved, real stakes." The atmosphere grew tense again, prickly with uncertainty. "What are you afraid of?" Mike asked, each syllable tinged with the urgency of needing to know whether his vision held merit or would collapse under the complications of reality. A pause ensued. It lingered so long that Mike's pulse quickened with anticipation. The truth lay bare, teetering on the edge of revelation. How would this define them all? Would it propel them forward or plunge them into chaos? The air in the room thickened with possibilities, questioning whether the very act of reaching across that void would ultimately lead to connection or conflict. In that charged silence, Mike could feel the pivotal moment standing before him, ready to decide the course of their lives and careers. Would they choose to engage or retreat? The answer might reshape everything they believed about corporate hierarchy and about themselves. The silence in the room felt suffocating, a thick veil of uncertainty that stretched across the faces of the board members. Mike's heart raced, the weight of expectation pressing down on him as he studied the CEO's conflicted expression. Could he take the risk of pushing further, or was it time to retreat? "What are the stakes you're referring to?" he pressed, clutching the table's edge tightly, feeling the cool wood beneath his palms. The question slipped from his lips as if guided by an instinct that he never knew existed. He realized then that this wasn't merely a corporate meeting, it was a crucible where his fears and aspirations collided. Her gaze shifted, glancing momentarily down at her hands before locking back onto Mike's. This company has been built on a foundation of performance. If we invite personal stories in, we may disrupt the very structure that keeps us afloat. It could expose vulnerabilities that some may not be ready to bear. That fear can lead to resistance, even chaos. Mike could feel the heat creeping up his neck. The shadows of doubt began to rear their heads again, threatening to unravel the vision he painstakingly cobbled together. What if she was right? What if bringing the personal into the professional could indeed wreak havoc? Yet, all he could think of was his own yearning for connection, for authenticity, a craving he suspected many others shared. Isn't that the point, though? Mike countered, surging with newfound resolve. We've built a fortress of professionalism, but at what cost? There's a deeper purpose we must embrace. You're right that stories expose us, but they also unite us. They help us understand ourselves and each other in ways that cold metrics never will. His voice had risen, filled with emotion, and for a moment, he feared he might have crossed a line. But the board members were attentive now, their breaths measured, as if they were considering a path they hadn't dared explore. Mike, envision what implementing such a shift requires, the CEO challenged, yet her voice lacked the harshness he anticipated. There was curiosity in her tone, perhaps even a hint of admiration. It's not simply about adding workshops. It's about redefining how we measure success, balancing compassion with profit. Are you prepared for that conflict? Conflict? He echoed, feeling a fire ignite within. This isn't merely discussion, it's a genuine call for transformation. If I'm to be afraid of anything, let it be the notion of remaining stagnant, of perpetuating a cycle where individuals feel like cogs in a machine. A flicker of recognition sparked in the CEO's eyes, and the room collectively drew in a breath. It wasn't outright agreement, but it wasn't rejection either. Mike sensed he had struck a chord, and now he had to follow through with action. Imagine creating a culture where vulnerability is a strength instead of a liability, Mike continued. Where team-building exercises integrate storytelling sessions, and performance reviews include discussions about not just what was achieved, but how everyone felt during the journey. We can reshape our narratives together. As the words spilled out, Mike felt them resonate not only within himself but in the silence surrounding him. The walls felt more porous, the board members leaning forward ever so slightly in their chairs. It was as if they were inching closer to an unseen precipice, ready to leap into the unknown. Change is daunting, but it's also liberating, he added, projecting a deeper vulnerability that matched the weight of his revelation. The real failure would be to deny our shared humanity. Now, all eyes were on him, and he could sense the tremors of a greater decision forming within that conference room. The tension was palpable, the stakes higher than Mike had anticipated. Just as he saw a glint of hope flicker in the CEO's gaze, the door creaked open, disrupting the moment. In walked a newcomer, a fresh intern with untamed ambition, who carried an air of innocence that starkly contrasted with the atmosphere generated by Mike's plea. Sorry to interrupt, the intern exclaimed, breathless. But I just heard about the vision session. What's it all about? Mike turned to exchange a glance with the CEO, both momentarily frozen in the unexpected turn of events. Would this new voice amplify their efforts, or would it pull the focus away from the delicate conversation they were navigating? Suddenly, the clarity he had felt seemed suspended in a flash. Change hung in the air, muffled by the uncertainty of the moment, a reminder that every breakthrough came with unpredictability. Mike stood on the precipice of transformation, armed with his newfound convictions yet aware of the fragile foundation on which they rested. Would this shift in momentum renew his momentum, or leave him grappling to redefine his purpose once more? As the intern's exuberance hung in the air, the room felt like it was teetering on the brink of revelation or rebellion. Mike could sense the CEO's momentary hesitation, a flicker of irritation intermingled with curiosity. This young intern, blissfully unaware of the stakes being discussed, might inadvertently disrupt the delicate balance that Mike had just strived to establish. Yet, this interruption also felt like a spark, igniting a potential direction that could either complicate or clarify his vision. What is it about the vision session that has you so curious? The CEO asked, her voice calm but edged with an authority that commanded respect. The intern, oblivious to the tension, beamed with enthusiasm. I've heard whispers about making our work culture more inspiring. It sounds exciting. I want to contribute. Mike regarded the intern, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over him. Here was someone whose very presence seemed to embody the open-mindedness that was needed. Could this in turn help shift the focus from an entrenched, risk-averse mentality to one receptive to innovation? With vitality pulsing through them, the younger generation often held the potential to transcend barriers that older paradigms had constructed. Your eagerness is refreshing, Mike interjected, reframing the abrupt entrance into a potential opportunity. The vision session is about exploring how we can connect on a deeper level at work. How stories and experiences can enhance performance and create a more cohesive team. The CEO raised an eyebrow, evaluating Mike's response. Part of him worried he hadn't acknowledged the seriousness of their task. Instead, he had redirected it toward a less threatening narrative. Yet, he felt invigorated, supported by the fresh perspective of the intern. Was it possible that, amid the board's apprehension, this young voice could present the case for change more effectively? Just as silence enveloped the room again, the CEO's posture shifted, revealing a glimmer of the understanding Mike desperately hoped to see. What are your thoughts? I believe inviting a broader dialogue could indeed reflect the values we want to instill. Emboldened by this small victory, Mike glanced at the intern, who appeared equally fascinated and daunted. Why don't you share why you think a culture shift is crucial? The intern took a deep breath, clearly flattered by the sudden spotlight. Well, I think a lot of people just come to work to earn a paycheck. But if we connected more as humans, like sharing our stories or challenges, wouldn't we feel less isolated? Maybe that would lead to more creativity and collaboration. The discussion shifted, now open and full of possibilities. The exchange of ideas flourished as board members began to offer their thoughts, merging Mike's vision with the enthusiasm radiating from the intern. Questions about implementation arose, and for the first time in this meeting, Mike felt they were parsing the elements of risk, not with fear, but with excitement. It became increasingly clear to Mike that this dialogue wasn't just about changing corporate culture, it was about reframing success itself. Could success mean more than quarterly numbers? Could it encompass the intangible benefits of belonging and understanding at work? As inspiration surged within him, Mike had a revelation. He needed a strategy to create a more inclusive atmosphere not just for themselves but for those marginalized by the very structure they were in. Yet, he wrestled internally. Would the board be equipped to embrace this level of transparency, or would it lift him too high, only to fall gravely? Moments passed like a film reel, speeding through various scenarios as discussions morphed into brainstorming sessions. Ideas cascaded, creating a tapestry of pathways that branched into uncharted territories. As the meeting wore on, Mike looked around to observe the subtle shifts, the interconventional body language, the nods of contemplation, the sparks of enthusiasm lighting up once skeptical faces. Change wasn't merely a possibility now. It felt imminent. Just as Mike began to formulate a clearer outline for the transformation, a secondary figure in the room, a longtime executive known for sharp criticism, cleared his throat. The room fell silent, tension coiling in the air again. I think I need to say something, he began, his tone skeptical. Change sounds good on paper, but what makes you think our teams are ready for this? Are you counting on idealism to replace metrics that drive our growth? With a rush of adrenaline, Mike felt the challenge pull him back to the precipice. Was he prepared to balance this romanticized vision with the hard truths of business? As he prepared to respond, his mind reeled. Would his conviction be enough to weather the pushback? The urge to retreat began to gnaw, but the fire of determination flickered defiantly in its place. The answer could define not only his vision but potentially reshape the entire culture of the organization. Mike inhaled deeply, bracing himself for the confrontation to come. Would he rise to the challenge, or would he cower under the weight of doubt? The real moment of truth was dawning, and he needed to confront not only the board but also his own fears. Mike's heart raced as he processed the criticism. The clash of ideals felt like a gauntlet thrown at his feet, a challenge not just to his vision, but to his conviction. Should he merely stand on a soapbox and preach the need for transformation, or was there a way to ground this vision firmly in the realities of the business at hand? His mind surged with thoughts while his throat felt constricted, as if the very air conditioning system in the conference room was siphoning away clarity. He needed to craft a response that resonated with both heart and strategy. I appreciate your concerns. Metrics are critical, and I don't advocate replacing them with vague aspirations. However, better engagement leads to improved productivity, which directly impacts those numbers. We're at a precipice. If we don't cultivate a culture of involvement now, stagnation could be our fate. The executive's brow furrowed, leveraging his skepticism like armor. And how do you plan to implement this culture shift without alienating those who thrive on the status quo? I don't intend to alienate anyone. Mike's voice grew steady, his resolve crystallizing with each passing second. We're not uprooting the foundation, we're renovating the structure. Engaging our teams through real connection makes them invested stakeholders rather than mere cogs in a machine. As Mike spoke, ideas spun in his mind like a whirlwind, chasing a direction. Could he incorporate metrics that showcased impacts of engagement? Senior executives often relied heavily on data, but what if he could present qualitative measures alongside quantitative results? He started picturing surveys and engagement indices that encapsulated employee sentiment, the kind of data that couldn't be ignored, no matter how traditionalist the board might be. The energy in the room shifted subtly as others began to murmur agreement. Words like commitment, trust, and collaboration started floating among the executives. This was all too fragile, and Mike could feel the tension ready to snap back like a taut string. Each member of our team, he continued, has a story worth sharing. Understanding that will build bridges that metrics alone can't establish. The intern seemed to radiate hope from the corner, and that once naive enthusiasm now felt grounded, even revolutionary in context. Inspired, Mike turned to the younger voice and encouraged, "What do you think? How do we weave personal stories into our business narrative effectively?" The intern, energized by Mike's invitation, stepped forward with new confidence. Maybe we start a shadowing program to see how different teams operate. We could share success stories online, emphasizing the human elements of our achievements. Together, their ideas seemed to crystallize like dew on grass, fragile, yet beautiful. Mike began plotting visual presentations for the next meeting, attempting to meld qualitative stories into graphs and analysis that would meet the board's expectations and demonstrate organizational pulse beyond numbers. Yet another familiar face, an executive known for stubbornness, leaned forward conspiratorially. "This sounds lovely, but what happens when we face our first obstacle? Employees need to know change won't crumble under pressure." Mike felt the familiar rumble of anxiety. A real, tangible fear snaked through his resolve. What if the very ideas he was nurturing swiftly unraveled? "You're right, setbacks will occur," he acknowledged. "But those experiences can cement trust. If we openly communicate, people will understand they're part of something bigger. Success isn't just about victory, it's also about how we triumph over adversity." As the discussion deepened, Mike's sense of leadership began to awaken. This was a new iteration of himself emerging, one who could meld inspiration with pragmatism. Perhaps he was not merely advocating change, he was leading by example and honing a transformative approach that would redefine his own role within the company. Before he knew it, as conversations flowed, questions morphed into actionable plans. Yet, a lingering sense of dread nestled in his gut. The room bristled with progress, yet Mike wondered whether he had adequately prepared for the inevitable pushback that would arise when theory met practice. Would the board accept these diverse sentiments, or would they cling to the safety of traditionalism? With adrenaline surging through him, Mike weighed the risk. Courage had never been about the absence of fear, it had always been about confronting it. He pulled himself from the depths of his contemplation to focus on the engagement before him, even as ominous thoughts lingered. Could he indeed foster this culturally rich environment he envisioned? Or would the very foundation he hoped to alter resist with formidable force? The clock ticked down, both heralding change and threatening him to push onward before the moment slipped. This was only the beginning, yet he felt something shifting beneath him, an unshakable current of potential. And then came the unnerving question: what would he do if faced with the possibility of failure? The conference room buzzed with energy, yet the hum only amplified Mike's internal dissonance. Despite the momentum he felt during the meeting, a nagging uncertainty pulsed beneath the surface. As he gathered his materials to leave, he couldn't shake the realization that his journey was only beginning with challenges he had not yet confronted lurking in the shadows. A day later, he descended into the depths of the building, where the janitorial staff worked quietly, their presence overlooked by most. While walking through the dimly lit hallways, Mike felt an urge to step outside the boardroom confines. He often dismissed the janitors, convinced their roles lacked impact on company culture. Yet, he found himself drawn to them, hoping to unearth stories of personal transformation and resilience. "Hey, Mike." Tom, the lead janitor, called out with a wave, his voice echoing off the walls. "What brings you down here? Need to borrow a mop?" The banter sparked a smile on Mike's face, lightening his mood. "Actually, I wanted to know about your experiences here. How does this company treat its people?" Mike's question cut through the casual tone, revealing his deeper intentions. Tom contemplated for a moment, the smile fading into seriousness. "It's complicated. Most of us work hard just to make ends meet. But every now and then, when a senior exec stops to acknowledge us, it means the world. Makes you feel like you matter." A wave of compassion washed over Mike. He had been so consumed by strategies and metrics, he had overlooked the very human stories that breathed life into the organization. "What about new changes? The push for better engagement?" Tom shrugged. "You might have some good ideas, but it's hard to change when people feel invisible. You gotta think about how it feels for someone scrubbing floors while the big bosses sit in their offices." The raw truth shook Mike. He had to embody the engagement he preached, not just in theory but in everyday interactions across every level of the business. "You're right," he admitted. "I'll make a point to connect with everyone." "Good luck with that," Tom chuckled, "but don't forget us down here. We deserve to be part of the story, too." After thanking Tom for his insight, Mike retreated to his office, a realization brewing. If he wanted to effect change, he must practice transparency and solicitude. Yet, as the door swung shut, doubt crept back in. Could he successfully advocate for a culture deeply rooted in connection, or would his efforts, like many before, fade into complacency? He began crafting a series of informal gatherings, inviting employees from all backgrounds to share their insights. As the dates drew nearer, hope mingled with anxiety. Would anyone show up? At the first gathering, a small group filtered in, hesitant yet curious. They sat in a circle, and Mike shared his vision, then called on everyone to contribute. Discussion flowed, and each voice, a spark, ignited in the shared experience. Yet not all were receptive. A veteran employee, arms crossed defiantly, challenged Mike's intentions. "What makes you think this will change anything? Every time we get hope, it's dashed by the same old management tricks." Struck by defensiveness, Mike hesitated. His mind raced to defend the change he wanted to see, but instead of arguing, he leaned into the discomfort. "I see your pain, I genuinely do. What can I do to prove that this isn't just talk?" The room shifted, vulnerability spread like a brush of warmth. They began sharing concerns, experiences, hesitations. Mike sensed a pivotal moment unfolding, not one driven by his ambitions but by a shared struggle for understanding. As conversation flourished, he recognized an undeniable truth: this was not merely a strategy session, but the birth of something deeper, rooted in human connection. In every candid exchange, he unearthed pieces of himself he had neglected, the empathetic leader longing to unify rather than divide. Yet, a voice of caution echoed in his mind: was he ready for the inevitable pushback? Once the board caught wind of these discussions, they might resist. Would he have the strength to defend the cultural shift when the tide turned against him? Standing amidst the energy of the room, Mike realized he had proposed a leap. A leap defined by vulnerability, courage, and connection. But could he sustain this newfound momentum? Just as hope blossomed, the weight of unresolved questions pressed heavily on his chest. In this spirited conversation lay a fork in the road. The choice of whether to forge ahead or retreat lingered like a specter. And as the gathering drew to a close, a chilling thought struck him. Would his resolve withstand the scrutiny of those whose traditions he sought to disrupt? Mike stood in the quiet aftermath of confusion, his heart still racing from the passionate exchanges that had filled the room. The sense of camaraderie and shared purpose had ignited a fire inside him, but even so, doubt hung like a dark cloud. He had broken through barriers, but the potential ramifications terrified him. Would this moment of connection lead to a revolution within the corporate culture, or would the executives dismantle it before it could take root? As he walked the familiar corridors, the echoes of laughter and conversation faded into silence, replaced by the rhythmic thud of his heart. He envisioned a new environment, one where stories, not spreadsheets, dictated the culture. It was tantalizing, yet the thought of facing off against entrenched opposition loomed large. The board's heft and long-standing influence felt insurmountable. The next day, just as he stepped into the office, an email notification pinged on his screen. A board meeting was scheduled to discuss the future initiatives he had proposed. Anticipation and dread swelled within him simultaneously. Would they embrace this transformative approach, or would they see it as a threat? For once, with clarity wrapping around him like a protective shield, Mike resolved to walk in prepared, armed with insights from the informal gatherings, a collection of stories reflecting the human experience within the corporate machine. He realized that the true strength of his vision lay beyond mere dialogue. It rested on the foundation of authentic relationships nurtured from shared struggles. He practiced his talking points, crafting a narrative that connected the dot between profitability and community. With every iteration, he distilled the raw essence of his experiences with the janitorial staff, employee concerns, and the unifying power of shared stories into palpable conviction. When the moment arrived, Mike walked into the boardroom, the weight of 1,000 voices, those of the employees who felt unseen, carried with him. He scanned the room, faces lined with skepticism and curiosity, but determination ignited his spirit. "Thank you all for gathering. I wanted to discuss how we can reshape our company culture," he began, steady in his gaze. His colleagues shifted in their seats, the stillness palpable, as he spoke candidly about the gatherings and shared stories. He highlighted the triumphs and challenges that echoed across the organization, portraying them as the bedrock of their corporate identity. "We can embrace resilience and connection. Therein lies not just our competitive advantage, but a commitment to humanity that we cannot afford to overlook." With each word, fervent resonance filled the air, bridging the gap between his past as a janitor and his present as a leader willing to advocate for change. This was not an endeavor born of abstract ideals. It was fueled by an undeniable urgency, the necessity for transformation that respected every worker's dignity and voice. As he shared the powerful testimonials collected from staff across departments, he could see the board members lean in, curiosity shifting their expressions. Mike noticed softened brows and exchanged glances. Perhaps he was penetrating their armor with a vision that featured not just lofty aspirations, but meaningful connection and engagement. Then, it happened. One of the more conservative board members, a man who had so often resisted change, turned to Mike and said, "You're suggesting we create a culture of authenticity and accountability. Do you genuinely believe that can alter our bottom line?" Mike took a deep breath, knowing he was about to unravel years of entrenched thought. "Yes, I do. Organizations driven by connection are not just healthier, they are more productive. Engaged employees enhance performance, which leads to increased productivity and profitability in the long run. By investing in a culture rooted in authenticity, we'll cultivate not only loyalty but also a shared mission that resonates deeply." The atmosphere shifted, conversations turned murmurings of agreement, and suddenly, what once felt daunting morphed into exhilarating possibility. His colleagues began to engage him, asking question after question. How would they implement it? What metrics could they utilize to prove success? Mike became more than just a voice. He was becoming an anchor of leadership in the room. With momentum building, it was no longer a debate on idealism versus practicality. It was a discussion framed on the intersections of connection and success. Conversations evolved into actionable plans that sustained the energy emerging from the staff discussions. Eventually, the meeting concluded with a unanimous decision to begin trials rooted in employee engagement strategies, and Mike felt a surge of accomplishment wash over him. As he stepped out of that conference room, for the first time, He genuinely embraced his identity as a leader, not merely a janitor but a catalyst for transformation. The fear that had once shrouded him began to dissipate. He had transformed his doubts into action, fueled by the belief that power inherently lay in the unity of diverse voices. He realized challenges were not merely obstacles to overcome, they were essential touchstones that propelled him toward greater understanding. As the weeks unfolded, the strategies began to bear fruit. Employees participated, leaders engaged, and a tangible sense of connection emerged, a fabric woven with stories and shared experiences that resonated across departments. They began to see one another not as mere cogs, but as integral threads within the corporate tapestry. In those moments, Mike stood firmly at the intersection of transformation, realizing he had achieved something profound. He conquered the fear that had once bound him, embraced his own potential, and generated impactful change through sheer courage and authenticity. The corporate landscape around him seemed brighter. Jane, a fellow janitor, approached him one day. "You've really changed things around here," she smiled. "Feels good to belong." In that instant, the true mark of fulfillment washed over him. It wasn't just about policies or performance metrics, it was about fostering a place where each story mattered and every individual voice was acknowledged. It was about legacy, and Mike had carved out a path defined by unity and human connection. He was no longer the invisible janitor, he became a recognized leader, a bridge between every level of the company. Solid confidence filled him now. He belonged, he achieved, and he had become an agent of change. And that was, without a doubt, the most profound personal achievement of all. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. You need to subscribe now. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.